people that I didn't know would come up and say to my mother, "Is this your baby?" And my mother would say, "Yes, this is our baby." And that had happened until I was about 40 years old. And I quit going to reunions. But I wanted to tell you a little bit about some of our ancestors and some of the real special things that they've done. But Hedge wanted me to tell about our family and growing up, and so I think it'll be quite boring, but I'm going to tell you a little bit about it. And if any of you, if you have questions, I want to give you a chance to ask me any questions of what it was like. First of all, I'm going to tell you about my mother. I only had one grandparent that was living when I was born. My grandfather, Andrus, he was born in 1848, and I was born in 1948. So we were 100 years apart when we were born. So I only had one grandparent, and that was my mother's mother. And we went to visit her once in a while. And I remember going there as a little kid, and my mother said before we got there, "I want you to go in and sit down and keep your mouth shut. And if you don't, you're not going to come again." And I knew she meant it, so I went there and was sitting in the living room, and my mother and Grandma were talking, and Grandma was showing her quilts that she had made and clothes, and I just sat there bored as could be. And my grandmother said, "If you'd like to go out and play, you can." Boom, I was out that door before she could get another breath of air. And they didn't see me till they had to try and find me to bring me home. But things were, parents were different back then. When they told their kids something, that you knew they meant it. And especially my father. If he told you something, he didn't ever have to raise his voice, and he would only have to tell you once. And if he told you something, yeah, you did it. You did it. Now, you might think that he was kind of a terrorist or hard to be around, but he wasn't. He was really good, and I'll just give you an example of that. When I was a kid, we went to church, priesthood meeting, and Sunday school in the morning, and then we would come back at night for sacrament meeting. And so I had a friend, and he would want me to come over, go home with him after Sunday school, and then come back at night, and then I could go home with my parents after sacrament meeting. And so I asked my father if I could do that, and I could tell that he didn't want me to do it. He didn't want me off playing around and with some kid being in trouble and doing stuff that he didn't want us doing. But he was just kind and good enough that he would let me do it. But he got smart and figured out what to do so that he didn't have to have that problem. We had 2 or 3 cows when we moved to Idaho. And then we bought the place across the river, the Brower place, and our Brower had about 12 cows. So we brought them over to our place, and we had to milk those cows, and we milked them all by hand. And so after, I don't want to swallow it. I don't want to swallow it. Is there anybody that can't hear me?
You've got to hold it close.
You gotta hold it up.
Right if you swallow it.
Okay, I'll try and swallow it. So anyway, we milked those cows by hand, and then we bought a few from the neighbor, and we kept eating more. And when I was in high school, I had to milk 45 cows night and morning before and after school, and Roy helped me a little bit, and then Kim, they made him my right-hand man, and first he started helping me feed the calves, and then he was so good that they turned him into a cow milker. And so we milked the cows pretty steady, didn't we, Kim? And we didn't have a chance to get in trouble because we had to milk those cows early in the morning and at night, before and after school, and also in the summer, plus haul hay. So we were really busy.
So when you were doing 45 head, were they by hand still?
No, after we had about 15 head of cows, we got a milking machine. And so then we started milking them by hand, and then none of the adults had to help us. We had to do it alone. Now, I want to tell you just a little bit about my parents, what kind of people they were. My mother was a hard worker, and I don't know her schedule, and Louise and some of you might know, but I know she made bread every week, and she usually had to grind the wheat to make the flour to make the bread. But when I grew up, you'd have a spoon or a fork in one hand and a slice of bread in the other hand at every meal. And that people don't do that today. So she had to make bread every week, and then she had a day for washing, ironing. I know she made soap, she made cottage cheese, just a lot of things, but she was always working. But she was so good. She was so good. Like if we were sick, she would do anything for us. She'd say, "Is there anything that you would like to eat or drink?" And if she had it or could get it, she would give you anything that you wanted to make you comfortable. And she'd stay up all night with you if she had to. She was just there for you. You could tell that she loved you and that she cared. And my father, he was a great worker. And one thing about him, there was right and wrong, and there was no excuse to not be doing what was right. There was just no reason why you shouldn't do what was right. And if you did what was right, you'd get along great. And I don't know what he would do if he had to raise kids in this generation.
I know.
Eat a death like the rest of us.
Tell us.
What happened? That what you-
I'm not going to tell you. You can imagine it.
So, and he was a great worker. They put up their hay by hand. They mow it with a team of horses and used a derrick to put it up. But one thing that I think was really incredible is that the amount of rocks that he hauled on our place. Our place was covered in rocks, and it didn't matter if you got every rock in the field. If you worked the field again, there would be just as many rocks, or at least real close. And he had piles and piles of rocks, but mainly down along the big gravel pit is where he would dump a lot of them. And he had his own wagon, and he had sides on it, and then he would put a chain across it to hold it together. And he had the floor. He had boards that he had hewn out with an axe, and then on the end, he kind of cut it so you could get a hold of it. And he'd just take a bar and put that side up, and then he could just move the boards over, and he could just dump a load of rocks in just a few minutes. And he could put his team anywhere he wanted to unload it, and he was very good with a team of horses. He could do anything. One time he came down with a load of logs. I think he'd been up Hoyt's Canyon, and a neighbor said, "Where'd you get those logs?" And he told him up Hoyt's Canyon, and he said, "No, you didn't." And he said, "I was up there this morning, and it's impossible. You couldn't do it." But he could. He could do anything he wanted with his horses. I remember being up there with him to get a load of wood one time, and he had the front bob of a sleigh, and then he loaded the logs on the front bob and then let the back drag. And and it was steep, really steep. And when we come down, he was right. He just put his axe in the front log and set right on the front. And those horses, those logs would just push them down that hill, and they had to run as hard as they could to keep from being run over by those logs. And I was back on the load, and I was kind of scared, but it was sure fun. But he was really good with horses.
If we go back and watch these videos, see how Louise's face lit up when you started talking about hauling rock.
We do that every year. Every year we hauled rocks, and we'd have to haul rocks before we could plant the crops. By the time we got the rocks hauled, all the moisture was gone out of the soil, and the crops wouldn't grow. So we had a crop failure. That's kind of the way I remember it.
True story.
But I wanna tell you a little bit. When I was in grade school, now we were really poor. When we went to Lava, my grandmother said, "I am so mad at Ivan for dragging Susie up to Idaho to pioneer," and it was pioneering. Now for me it was an adventure, and I loved it. It was great. I really loved it. But it was not easy. The place where we lived, the house we lived in, was just a shell that had been drug there. It was 2 stories. It wasn't put on a foundation. I think they had some logs under it, but it settled, and the floor was so unlevel. And when it would snow, in my bedroom, there's cracks enough around the windows, no insulation, that there'd be snow on the floor. And it would be so cold when it was winter that our mother would have irons that she would heat on the stove and then put them in a flour sack and send them to bed with us. Now I didn't have to do that much because she had really good down quilts and plenty of blankets, and I was always warm. It's a little cold when you got into bed, but I always warmed up, and it was great for me. I didn't ever sleep in a heated bedroom my whole life, but it was a struggle. It was a struggle to exist and make a living, and me and Roy, we wanted to earn some money, and there's some things we wanted to buy, like a bicycle and things. And so we started trapping, and we trapped muskrats and beaver, and we were very successful at it. And I was just in grade school, but we would get up at 5 o'clock in the morning and check our traps with flashlights. And then at night, we would reset them in different locations. And there's been more than once I've been out skinning a muskrat in front of the house, and the school bus would come. I'd run around the house so they couldn't see me. But we made quite a bit of money. We really worked at it, and we were very good at it. And I know we caught 15 beaver, and some of them were up at the Beaver Pond Canyon, and we would go up there on a horse till the snow would get too deep, and then sometimes we'd walk or ski. And I remember one time that we'd been up checking our beaver traps, and when we started back down, we see mountain lion tracks had been stalking us. Those tracks were in our tracks from when we were going up. So there was a mountain lion that was stalking us, following us. But we were very successful trapping and made several $100s. I think we caught around 300 muskrats, and I know we caught 15 beaver, and we weren't able to buy the things that we wanted because our parents would borrow our money and buy groceries. And I had still, when I come off my mission, I still have the piggy bank, and it was full of IOUs from my mother. Now, at the time, I was not too happy about it, but I don't think as long as I live, I'll be able to pay my mother for what she did for me. She was a saint, and she was so good, and she did everything to help someone else. And my father was so good. If you were obedient, he couldn't have been better and kinder, and we just had a great family life and great experience growing up. And I've thought oftentimes, why was I allowed to have such wonderful parents? I couldn't have had better parents. That's the way I feel. I had as good of parents as there was on this earth. And I thought about it, and the only thing that I can figure is that maybe in the spirit world, they might have said, well, that person won't make it unless we give him the best parents there are. And that's the only thing I can figure, that I don't think I did anything to earn the parents that I had. And I'm so grateful for them. I'm so thankful for the example that they were to me. And they always tried to teach me right and to do right. And if I mess up, it's not because of them, because they sure did their part. But I just really cherished my experience of growing up in Idaho, and being poor did not bother me. I loved it. Now, I don't know if anybody has any questions that you'd like to ask. If you do, why, feel free. Go ahead, Anita.
Please tell how you made the money from,
How we made our money?
with the beaver.
The trap.
Okay. Most of our furs, and we would skin them and stretch them. And a muskrat, you can, if you know what you're doing and got a sharp knife, you can skin a muskrat in just a couple of minutes. They're really easy to skin. And then we had a wire frame stretcher. You pull that inside out and stretch it down over there, and then there's some clamps that you fasten it at the bottom. And we'd dry them, and after we get a lot of them, we would usually take them into McCarty's in Pocatello. That was a fur buyer, and then they had buckskin gloves that the Indians would make and sell, and that's where we would sell most of our furs. Now we did send some to, I think it was Washington, and the ones that were a little smaller and not really top quality, we probably didn't do as good as we did at McCarty's. But some of the top ones, we would get like $3 for a muskrat hide. And the beaver, we'd get like $15. And beaver are extremely hard to skin. And you have to really be careful, because you can't just peel the hide off like a muskrat. You can just pull it off. But a beaver, you have to cut every bit of it, and you have to be careful that you don't cut the hide. And when you stretch it, we would stretch it like on a board, big board wall, and we would tack it, and it would stretch perfectly round. But we did really well. We made quite a bit of money. A good question. Anybody have any other questions you'd like to ask? Nola May.
Who taught you how to stretch them and dry them?
What's the question?
Nola May wants to know who taught us how to do this.
I think he looked it up on the internet.
I didn't look that up on the internet or anything else in my life. There was a trapper from McCammon, Fred Neeser, and he showed us how to do it. But a lot of it, we just did it by experience and trial and error. And but we were very conscientious, and we were very successful. I will tell you one experience we had. One night, Roy and I were resetting our traps down along the river, and it was really, really cold. There's probably 1.5 feet, 2 feet of snow on the ground, and it was really cold. And I was bent over, setting a trap in the river, and I fell in the river. And it was probably, if it wasn't 0, it was close. But I got out of the river, and I knew I had to get home sooner. I'd be froze to death. And so I left Roy there, and I went home as fast as I could go. And by the time I got home, my clothes were froze solid. They're just like I was trying to run in cast iron pants. It was something, but I was able to get home and get my frozen pants and clothes off and get dry clothes on until I recovered fully. Jay.
How did you skin the muskrat without throwing up?
Oh, a trapper doesn't throw up.
I guess I'm not a trapper.
It was not difficult to skin a muskrat at all. It was so simple and so easy, and it was just like doing anything. It was not difficult or disgusting at all. Go ahead.
And what did you do with the inside parts?
What?
The carcass.
Well, when we were trapping, we had a couple of pigs, and we would feed those muskrats to the pigs, and they would eat them. They liked them.
Anybody getting hungry?
They were having muskrat stew for lunch, right?
Never did. Ruth.
What are some of the main things you learned from your parents' examples, and what are some of the main things you learned from what they actually said?
Okay. That is a very good question. I think one of the things that I learned is to be honest. My father was so honest that he got taken advantage of a lot. He was a horse trader. He would trade horses, and he would always tell the truth about his horse, and whoever was trading horses with him would lie about theirs, so he would get the worst end of the deal every time. But then
Every time.
But then he would take that horse that he got in the trade, and he would work with it and make a good horse out of it and get it over whatever was wrong with it. Then another horse trader or the same one would come and trade him out of that one and get him another bad one. And he didn't ever learn. Okay. As far as what I learned from my parents, that they were always teaching, and they would do it in teaching moments. They didn't just sit you down and say, you do this, you do this. There'd be, as life went on, there'd be situations that you'd be in. I remember my mother telling me one time, you always pay your way, pay your part. I remember telling me that just when I was little. There were just so many things that they taught. They were always trying to teach you what was right. They from the time I was just little, I paid my tithing, and it wasn't in dollars, it was in pennies. And I remember going to Bishop Andrus and paying my tithing, and it was not very much money, but they were so good and made me feel like it was $1 million, and it was just really, really special. So I didn't have a chance to earn much money when I was that little. I could weed garden maybe, and I might get 10 cents a row, and I was so young that I had a hard time telling the vegetables from the weeds. That's how young I was. But my parents taught me to work young, and they set the example. But my parents had so much integrity. They just tried to treat, now this is my perspective, but they tried to treat everybody right, to be fair, to be honest, and to do the right thing all the time. And the gospel was so special And they were always teaching me to live it and to do what was right. And I gained a testimony pretty young. I couldn't say that I knew the church was true, but I certainly believed it. But after applying Moroni's test of the Book of Mormon when I was on my mission, and it took some effort, why I was able to know that it's true also. It took some study and fasting and prayer, and it didn't just come overnight. It took some effort, but I got a witness, and that is so valuable to know. Anything else, anybody?
Yeah. I'm wondering, there's a two-time Teacher of the Year in New York named John Taylor Gatto that a friend of mine loaned me a book he wrote called Dumbing Us Down, subtitled The Hidden Curriculum of Compulsory Schooling. And in the book he calls for the immediate decertification of teaching and give people back their tax dollars and let them choose their own thing. I wonder if you would take some unique insights to give us your philosophy on that subject.
I don't know that this is the place for me to say very much, but I will tell you that I dislike school. I hated school. I would stay home and haul manure, haul rocks, do anything, herd sheep, milk cows, anything rather than go to school. I hated school. I remember when I was in about the 3rd grade, I was looking out the window and the teacher come up with a yardstick and just hit my desk with that yardstick and made a big bang, about scared me to death. Boy, she didn't want me looking out the window. She wanted me looking at her. And what was going on outside was a lot more interesting than what she was telling me.
So based off how you feel about your parents, what would you recommend to my generation for our parenting styles?
That is a great question.
Get this recorded.
Parents don't teach their kids today like we were taught. My parents were very kind and very good, but when they told you something, they meant it, and you did it. You did it, and you didn't have to be told twice, and they didn't threaten you. And we were taught to work. Another thing, when we sat down to a meal, if we didn't eat all of our food, they didn't say, "Oh, you have to eat it." They'd put it in the fridge, and you could eat it the next meal. But you didn't waste food. You didn't waste food when I grew up. But things are so different now. I just can't imagine today. I just can't hardly imagine a kid being in grade school, getting up at 5 o'clock in the morning and checking traps, going walking miles to check traps and then skin muskrats and beaver. I can't hardly fathom it. But we didn't have a TV. We weren't blessed with a TV, with internet, Facebook, any of that stuff. We weren't blessed with that. So that's what we did.
I was Jim's age, and I couldn't believe that you get up that early and go run a trap fire. My sleep was just way too valuable to do it. So I guess some of the kids have inherited.
Jim said he didn't know how he was blessed to have the parents he had. One time my father said to me, and he was kidding, I didn't take offense. He said, "You were a selfish little thing to choose a father from one family and a mother from another family." And one time he said, "Well, he used to call the 4 of us half-breeds. Well, you guys are the half-breeds." And I said, "Well, Pa, why am I the half-breed? I've got both of my parents."
Hey, but Jim, you did go to BYU, right?
For a little bit, but I didn't take any English or math or science.
I'll tell you what class he did take, but it wasn't a class really. he was in the student dairy, and they'd get up way, when it was their turn to milk, they'd get up way early in the morning, go milk, and they'd be done. They had to milk early so the BYU herd could be milked.
Hold it close so we can hear.
So he would be done milking he and the others by 6 o'clock in the morning. So he'd go to the swimming pool, BYU swimming pool, and the only other person in there was President Wilkinson.
And that's true, but I didn't ever talk to him. I thought he doesn't want to see me. But we were in the same pool together quite a few mornings. We were the only ones there.
We're going to have Nola come now and read some of the excerpts from my parents' journal, mainly my father. I did not know that he had a journal till a year or two ago. Apparently Ken came across it. I do not know, I didn't see it. I didn't hear him talk about it. I didn't see it. I didn't see him write anything in it. But he's got a lovely journal, and we've got some excerpts. But just before I hand the microphone to her, you've heard what a wonderful family we are, but I've asked some of the people that has married into the family to give their perspective. So I would like Colleen and Audrey and Marcy and Cameron, is he still here? And Carla. Get your thoughts ready. You'll come up here in a minute and tell us. And I want you to tell the truth, but be kind.